Hello, I want to talk about Sunita Vishwanath, who I believe is from a very similar background to me, though she's a few years younger. And I would like you to hear what she has to say. And the reason is that Sunita Vishwanath, she is a very considerable, a very important person in that she has been honored by President Obama for something or the other. And she's essentially, she believes that there is something in common between Donald Trump, Narendra Modi, and she is a member of something called a coalition against fascism in India. And now, the reason that I feel able to comment on her self, on her narrative of herself, is because I'm an Iyer. I believe, probably of a very similar caste, very similar background to this lady. I'd have left Madras, which is Chennai, a few years before she did. And I think, and I don't have a Jewish husband as yet, but I feel that I am pretty much culturally on the same page as she is. And if she represents Hinduism, so do I. Let us now hear from this wonderful, quite dotty lady.
Good evening, Namaste.
Oh,
I'm
namaste.
Sunita Vishwanath, and I am a co-founder of Hindus for Human Rights. I am a grassroots human rights activist. I was born in Madras, India.
It's
at
called
15
Chennai.
years old. I was born into an upper caste Hindu family, a girl child. And when I was 1 year old, my parents, like so many Indians, left this country and went to the UK to seek a better life. And it so happened that I spent the ages of 5 to 10 in India again without my parents. So those 5 years in India, living in an upper caste Hindu.
She was living with her granny. Basically, the parents have gone. So she was living with her granny. And this is exactly what happened, but not for 5 years, but for a very much shorter period, to my sister, who's an IFS officer and who now works for the United Nations in New York. Now, what Sunita Vishwanath is going to go on to describe is something called Madi, or ritual purity rules. But sadly, and of course, my sister and I myself, we know the Madi rules, and to this day, when I have a haircut, I must immediately have a shower, even though I don't really have a lot of hair on my head. But you see, this very foolish woman doesn't understand that, and she's younger than me, she doesn't understand that by the time, she was born, the Brahmins didn't have any power in Madras, in Chennai. And, they could have stigmatized anybody that they liked for a purely religious reason. But they were also, they'd get beaten, they'd have their sacred threads torn off, and, they had to pipe small. And the fact of the matter is that the anti-Brahmin parties did better. They had better governance. They produced better outcomes than the very foolish, extraordinarily stupid regime of Rajaji. And so, the fact is that Tamil Brahmins supported, one or the other of the DMK parties, and we still continue to do so in Tamil Nadu. At the same time, we support the BJP. Just as in Kerala, if I could vote for, if I was from Kerala, I'd vote for KK Shailaja. I want her, for the communists, because they're doing, KK Shailaja has done a fantastic job as health minister. So this is the whole story here. Now, what Sunita Vishwanath, and that ought to be Vishwanathan, shouldn't it? What sort of a name is that? Sunita Vishwanath, it's missing something. This is a woman who doesn't understand what the tremendous social change which occurred in Tamil Nadu and so forth because of democracy, because people could vote. And when they voted for people who delivered better governance, then that's when these stupid prejudices and crazy shit disappeared. Let me be absolutely clear about this. The COVID virus has led to social distancing. Now in Kerala, and particularly in Kerala, you had social distancing between the untouchable and the touchable castes. But that's because in Kerala, there's a very high prevalence of COVID-type viruses. And just 2 years ago, there was the Nipah virus, because, you have bats. You have bats floating around, flying around all over the place in Kerala. And if an infected bat, eats a fruit and then somebody else eats the remainder of the fruit, then you have the Nipah virus, and it's horrendous. And KK Shailaja, the health minister, she coped with that very well, and that's why a film was made about her. A Malayali film was made about her. She's a superstar. And then when the COVID virus came, Kerala was, they were ahead of the curve. They sorted it out. This isn't it's a purely administrative matter. They had institutional memory of how to deal with it, and they dealt with it very well. But the point I'm making is that the Madi, the ritual purity rules that Sunita Vishwanath is talking about, they arise out of a very primitive pathogen avoidance theory. And as modern medicine, sublated those theories, this thing has disappeared in Tamil Nadu, which actually has more. Tamil Nadu also did well in coping with the COVID crisis because of its, very good ratios in terms of, doctors and patients, and, actually higher level medical facilities. Anyway, let's go back to listen to this cretin.
Family in Madras really made me who I am. So in my family, we practiced, and this is an issue of deep pain and shame for me. In my family, when I was a child, we practiced untouchability. When we had a haircut, because the caste of the person who cuts your hair is lower, we had to take a shower. And
this woman is completely ignorant. Even if your mother or your father cuts your hair, you still, you are not in Madi, you have to take a shower. You are ritually impure. The cutting of hair or skin or anything like that, for pathogen avoidance reasons, gives rise to impurity and requires some sterilizing process. So this cretinous woman, who was really, because she was a woman, she was a girl. She was not being trained to the priesthood. She was not being taught Sanskrit and priestcraft or anything like that. She was making this nonsense up, And the fact is that people in Tamil Nadu, Muslim people, Christian people, anybody at all who has a haircut then has a shower. You know why? Because those tiny little hairs, if they prick at you. So this woman says that she knew about untouchability, and she's a few years younger than me. Now, if all this is true, she should either have reported, and if this is still carrying on, she should report her grandparents to the police for practicing untouchability. The thing is against the law. But this is...
Every single day, the woman who would come into our house and clean the toilet, we called her scavenger. And we could not touch her. In fact, we could not even lay eyes on her. And I, as a little child, I was always that child that said, no, that's not fair. Why? That was...
This is mad. The fact of the matter is that either these people lived in a shithole and didn't have a water closet, whereas my grandmother, who's a socialist, by the way, and we had a proper bathroom. We lived in T Nagar. So what this lady is really saying is, I come from a shitty background, which I can well believe. But her saying at the age of 10, "Why, I can't accept this." Is that drama queen behavior or what?
Was me, and I'm still that person. That child is still in me that says, no, that's not fair. And so when I would say that's not fair, my family would allow me to ask those questions. So I was empowered. I was a girl that was allowed to ask questions.
Yeah, but, what did you achieve? The fact of the matter is that you haven't done anything with your life. Now, if you compare yourself to my sister, or to Nirmala Sitharaman, who belongs to the same caste, Nirmala Sitharaman is the finance minister of India. And she did more than ask questions. She actually joined the political party which is determined to stamp out this nonsense of ritual purity, to get rid of it. The RSS was founded by a doctor, and of course he was doing that in imitation of another doctor who had founded the Congress Seva Dal. So you see, doctors in the 1920s, they were saying, let's create social organizations which stamp out these ridiculous types of pathogen avoidance strategies. And of course it's we all know that medicine works. But this cretinous lady, she thinks she was empowered. No, she wasn't empowered. She has no power. She got married and she was divorced, and good luck to her, she found a wonderful Jewish husband. Excellent. Good. But the Tamil Brahmins and the South Indian Brahmins, and I believe that is her caste. That's where she comes from. They don't really have anything comparable to a Haredi, to an ultra-Orthodox element. No, we all want our kids to become doctors and so forth. And we pipe small. I mean, some of us may believe in caste and, that's all, but we pipe small. We're not going to talk about it. It would be foolish to do so, because Brahmins get beaten up, and Brahmin priests get killed in the countryside if they, if a patron, if somebody says you've got to come to my wedding, and you go, I'm pre-engaged for that wedding, and they say, well, I'm just going to shoot you, and that happens. because Brahmins don't have any power. Which is, which makes sense because priests don't have power. You have to have money, you have to have land, you have to have muscle to have power. Anyway, the reason that I have made this brief video is to show that this lady, Sunita, who is part of something called a coalition against fascism, I want to show that she has no knowledge, no understanding either of what's happening in Chennai in South India. She has no understanding that she's not high caste at all. Poor dear, what does she think? Does she think that she could come back to Chennai and strut around, saying, "Oh, you're an untouchable, get away from me"? She'd have her fucking head smashed in. So this is ludicrous nonsense. And the question arises as to what is a major malfunction? And I suppose the answer is that, parents went off to the UK. Well, that's where I live. And, she studied here. I rather think that she would have retreated into a high caste shell. And the reason for that, it's because it's very difficult to get a Jewish husband if you're Indian, South Indian, here. Simply because the Indian immigrants who came here were working class. And whereas those who went to America were better qualified. So, but I shall return to this subject in my subsequent video.